It's Ash from SuperVideos back for another in-depth review of an episode of The Last of Us on HBO. This is my review for Season 1, Episode 7, which was called Left Behind. So stay tuned, we'll be right back with my review. Alright, as always, before we dive into it, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. With that said, let's dive right into it. So of course, this episode was, I would say, one of few episodes that was exactly like the video game. They didn't change much as far as the story, and they kept it relatively the same as far as the story is concerned. Of course, the episode started with the aftermath of Joel's injury, where we actually saw Ellie taking care of Joel. It was exactly like the game, and I really liked it, and I think that it worked really well in the grand scheme of things. The only thing that I miss in this particular part of the story was seeing Ellie really try to hunt down some medical supplies. It seemed like she found it relatively easily at the house by the end of the episode, but we didn't really see her struggle. And I think one of the reasons why that story was really impactful in the game was because we saw Ellie really struggle to find the medical supplies. So there was a lot of reward when she found it. And as part of that, it was visually awesome to see the helicopter crashing into the mall that we saw where Ellie was at trying to find medical supplies, which was pretty awesome, which obviously worked really well with the Left Behind stuff because that took place at the mall. So I think skipping that was definitely a missed opportunity. Then moving on to the flashbacks at the FEDRA camp, which we didn't really see in the video game. Obviously, seeing Ellie and another girl fight was really awesome. And I feel like this was some sort of an Easter egg or callback or foreshadowing, whatever you want to call it, to what we're going to see later on in season 2, possibly between Ellie and Abby. So I think the fact that they brought this in and did some sort of an early tease at that was definitely cool. Moving on to Ellie talking to the captain at the FEDRA school. The whole dialogue and the back and forth between them was awesome, and I really liked it. For the most part, it was great to see another perspective because up until this point, we were under the assumption the FEDRA, or all of the FEDRA, I should say, are fascists. But obviously, through this experience we had with Ellie, obviously, we learned that maybe some of them do really care and not all of them are fascist dictators. The whole conversation between them was awesome, and I liked how Ellie, by the end of that conversation, came out thinking that she could really do things differently to really make a difference. So I thought that was all great. Moving on to this stuff, I really liked the Easter eggs in the background. Obviously, all of the references to space and all of that was cool because we know Ellie likes space exploration. So it was great to see that teased. And obviously, in the previous episode, Ellie actually talked about this with Joel. But this does definitely tease at the stories that we're going to see in part 2 between Joel and Ellie at the Space Museum. And then obviously we get into Riley's introduction, which was exactly like the game. They didn't change much and it worked for the most part. Let's talk about the infected that they saw. I thought that that was a filler moment. They didn't really do too much with it and they could have done more with it. Like, seemed like they were gonna have the infected attack and they were gonna do this great action sequence, but they didn't do that and they just basically had the infected go down and that was the end of it. And I feel like the only thing that this was really meant to do was have them find the drink, which they could have done in other ways. Like, they didn't need to go through all of this just for them to find the drink. If they weren't going to do anything spectacular with the infected, you know what I mean? But the next thing I want to talk about is how Riley brings up Marlene in conversation. I thought that was great, and I liked that they didn't really reveal it was Marlene that she was talking about until later on in the episode. But then we get to the point where they actually get into the mall. I thought that visually it was great. the mall, the abandoned mall, looked identical to the abandoned mall in the video game. So that was all great. And I love that they put subtle Easter eggs in the background, movie posters that we see here, which was obviously movie posters that we saw throughout in the game. Next, let's talk about the carousel that they find. I thought that was cool, identical to the game. They didn't change much, and I really liked the way they did it. Short and to the point. The only thing that they added, I think, here is they talked a little bit about why Riley didn't want to stay at the camp because of the assignment that she got. That was an addition that I don't think was in the game, and I thought that it was a fitting addition. Next, let's talk about the photo booth. Not much to break down here. It was identical to the game. Loved it. It was great for what it was again. And, just seeing cutscenes from the game be translated to live action was awesome. That's just the best way to describe it. But then there's one problem I had. Obviously, to keep it realistic in the game, the printer didn't work after they took the pictures, but it did in the TV adaptation. Although it didn't really work, but it still printed stuff, which doesn't make sense because being that far into the apocalypse with the mall being abandoned, there shouldn't really be anything being printed here. So that was a little unrealistic to say the least. But then we get to them going to the arcade. I thought that was great, just like the game. It was almost identical, so that was all great. Loved how they found the Mortal Kombat arcade and they started playing it. That was great. This was obviously also referred to earlier in the TV adaptation when Ellie found another machine at an abandoned gas station or something. She did talk about this particular game and playing this particular game with Riley, which was this exact scene that we saw. So this was all great. And then we get into the stuff with them finding the pun book. I thought that was great, just like the game. Not much to break down. And I think that it was fun and it really worked and I loved it. But then we get to the point where Ellie finds these smoke bombs or pipe bombs or whatever it was that Riley was building because she obviously is a part of the Fireflies now. I thought that it was great that Ellie found it, but I found her reaction unrealistic and unreasonable because obviously the first thing Riley told Ellie was that she's a Firefly. So I feel like her reaction here should have been the reaction that she has earlier. So it took away from some of the impact. And I get it that now she found something and reacted to it, but at the same time, it would have been better if they did something like this earlier. But the next thing I want to talk about is this leads directly to the fight that they have. And it causes Ellie to just leave. Now, I thought that it was a little unrealistic for Ellie to just leave like that. I mean, I get it that this came up when Riley said, I'm going to go away and leave. So it makes sense. But at the same time, I feel like they rushed that particular back and forth a little bit. I feel like they could have really let the moments breathe in order to have this be more impactful. I feel like she went away all crying and stuff, and then she turned around in an instant. And I feel like maybe it should have taken a little bit more time. But then let's talk about the fake out that they did with the screaming and then Ellie finding this animated skeleton thing at the Halloween shop. I thought that that was a little bit of a cheap stunt and I feel like it was generic and kind of repetitive. It's been done thousands of times in horror movies before. So it was cool because it obviously got me. If you watched my reaction, you know that, but it was something that didn't need to be there. You know what I mean? But then obviously we get into the conversation that Ellie and Riley have, and that conversation I thought worked really well. They talked about family and all of that, which was great. Now, one thing I want to mention here is that when Riley spoke about her mother, I feel like it would have been the perfect time for them to ingest the flashbacks with Anna. Anna obviously is Ellie's mom, and we know that we're getting that in the finale. But I feel like this would have also been another great place for that. But then we get into the masks and them dancing. I thought that was great. Obviously, exactly like the game. The only thing I would say is they didn't do the water gun scene, which I actually really loved in the game. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But then we get to their first kiss, which was again just like the game, so it works. Not much to really break apart here. But then we get into the story where they're attacked by the infected. Now, I love the fact that they teased the infected earlier, but I feel like how they teased the infected was cooler than the infected showing up. You know what I mean? So it was disappointing seeing the infected after that great tease, because the infected wasn't as cool as how it was teased. I feel like toning down on the violence and giving us less infected is definitely hurting the show. I mean, the way Ellie kills her first infected in the game was phenomenal. It was so cool with the throat cut and everything. It was impactful. They gave us this generic scene in the TV adaptation and had Ellie just kill the infected by stabbing it in the head. I mean, that wasn't as cool as the game. And they could have done a lot. We didn't see any infected in this episode. This was the only one. And even with that, they decided to not really do the kill like the game for whatever reason. Obviously, they wanted to tone down on the violence, it seems. But what I'm trying to say is they could have still given us a pretty brutal and impactful and awesome scene here, and maybe we wouldn't even have noticed that we didn't get as many infected. But they didn't even do that, so that's disappointing. But then we get to the point where it's revealed that both of them are bit. I really loved how that came together, just like the game again. But I really loved Ellie's reaction. I loved Ellie's reaction more in the TV show than the game, which is a good thing. And then obviously we see Riley's also bit, and this is just like the game. So everything worked really well. And then we get to the final scene between them, the closing dialogue between them, the monologue, I should say. I thought that that was great, just like the game. And in the game, it was powerful. And in the show, it was just as powerful. And the acting was great. The only thing I would say is that they left Riley's fate open ended, more so in the TV show than the game. And I feel like that was a bit of a cop out. Like they could have really made the episode more impactful by kind of following through and finishing everything, like giving us the conclusion to her story. But we didn't really get that. But then the episode ends with Ellie returning to Joel and kind of deciding that she's going to take care of him, which I thought was great. A great way to bookend the episode and end what was, I think, a really, really slow bottle episode that could have been merged with another episode. I mean, they could have either expanded it or they could have merged it. And they didn't do any of that. So the episode, for what it was definitely not as exciting as it should have been. If they followed the game, it would have been pretty action packed and it would have been great. But they didn't do that. They skipped a lot of the infected showing up, they skipped a lot of the action, and overall, it was definitely, I would say, a bottle episode that was disappointing compared to the game. But with that, what is my rating of this episode? I would have to give this episode a 6 out of 10. It would probably be my least favorite episode so far. Even episode 3, that I thought was a bottle episode and an episode that was disappointing, was in some ways better than this episode. There was a better story. But with that said, that's pretty much everything. That's my review of this episode. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.